All right, good morning, everyone. Good morning. This is the MAG 911 Study Committee. We'll now call this meeting to order. For those around the table, please turn on your microphone when speaking. For those participating via Zoom, please state your name when making a comment or asking a question. The MAG public comment process allows members of the public to comment on items on today's agenda or on items that fall under MAG's jurisdiction. If you'd like to comment at today's meeting, excuse me, please fill out a white request to speak card located on the front on the information table and give it to MAG staff. If you parked in the garage, parking validators are available on the information table. If you purchase a transit ticket to come to the meeting, please see staff for a ticket. Hearing assisted devices are available from MAG staff. Before we begin with roll call, we have some new members we want to recognize. First, we have it's Stephanie Heinzelman from the Chandler Police Department. It's a new vice chair on the MAG Public Safety Answering Point Managers Group. And Brent, is it Axine from the Glendale Police Department is the new vice chair of the MAG 911 Oversight Committee. And Tracy Mills, City of Surprise, is the new chair of the MAG Technology Advisory Group. Wow, just churned everything over. Welcome and welcome. We look forward to your participation on this committee. Hopefully we're at the end, so you won't have to suffer through so much. We'll now begin the meeting with a roll call of members, please.
All right, thank you, Chair. I will go through the list of members. When I call your name, please indicate you are present for the record. Dale Nanagay.
Present.
Thank you. Dan Cotterman.
Here.
Thank you. Joshua Wright.
Here.
Thank you. David Raymer. Stephanie Heinzelman.
Present.
Thank you. Chair Phelps.
Here.
Thank you. Brent Axine.
Here.
Thank you. Santiago Rodriguez. Chair Brady.
Present.
Thank you. Tracy Mills.
Present.
Thank you. Scott Walker.
Present.
Thank you. Jesse Cooper.
Present virtually.
Thank you, Jesse. And Santiago Rodriguez, are you here?
Yes, present virtually.
Thank you, Santiago. Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Do we have any requests from the audience to speak?
No, Chair, we do not have any requests to speak cards or public comments.
All right, thank you. So we'll skip item 2. We'll now proceed to item 3, which is the approval of the April 17th, 2023 MAG committee minutes. Does any member of the committee have any questions or comments on the minutes? Prior to approval of this item, do we have any members of the public who wish to comment on this? Assuming not. All right. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes of the April 17th, 2023 meeting?
So moved.
Have a motion from Kevin. Second from Dan. So we have a motion and a second. All those that are here present, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? And staff, will you take a roll call of members participating virtually, please?
Thank you, Chair. When I call your name, please indicate how you vote. Joshua Wright.
Aye.
Thank you. Santiago Rodriguez.
Aye.
Thank you. Jesse Cooper.
Aye.
Thank you. Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you. All right. The next agenda item is a presentation from the 911 consultant on their assessment of the regional 911 system. They'll also provide state and peer review assessments of current and emerging 911 technology options. Eric Perry, Steve Verbal, senior consultants with Federal Engineering, are here with us today to provide this report. Scott Strom, project managers, all join us online. Audrey, do you want to introduce this, or what do you want to do? Do you want to kind of kick this off for us?
Sure. We received the draft report on Friday. They're going to give a presentation today, updating you on that draft report, and then I'll be sending it out to the committee this afternoon. for you to review. They're doing this as a trio, so I will let them run through it on their own.
Okay.
And I believe Scott is starting. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. So we'll kick off with Scott, and then they can provide some context around the report and what you can expect to see
Wonderful.
moving forward.
All right, Scott, you're up.
All righty. Thank you, everyone, and good morning. Since I'm on remote here, I'm assuming that you all can see the presentation right now, and I just have to give a verbal okay to go to the next slide, and somebody will change that for me.
Looks good.
Okay. All right. Again, thanks, everyone. My name's Scott Strom. I'm the project manager for federal engineering on this particular project. With me today, if you go to the next slide, please, is Eric Perry and Steve Verbal. They're the two team members on my team here that did the bulk of the work for this initial draft report, and then the subsequent final report that will be coming out in mid-June, following up with the options and recommendations. Next slide, please. What we're going to have the guys cover today basically is what we're calling phase 1 or phase 2, or sometimes we've referred to it, or you may have seen it referred to as task 1 and task 2, which is basically we've combined the two tasks into one report in talking with Nathan Pryor and with Audrey Skidmore, knowing that the utmost importance of trying to get as much information out to you folks as early as we possibly could. Most of you recall, during the project kickoff, the original schedule had us going out all the way out, I believe, out into the early to middle part of July. And with just the sensitivity of this project and the information that you all needed and wanted to get in your hands as quickly as possible, we did some acceleration on a few things and combined a few items here. And this is at least the initial stage of the crux of that right now. So what we want to do today is just give you, the guys are going to run through just a high level of the process that they went through and the initial findings that we have aggregated together, predominantly in two areas. There are actually three areas. The first one was, conducting the actual interviews of all the member agencies, sitting down, getting information from those folks. And then the other two items that they're going to cover today is our interview with the state to gather as much information we could with the state and what the options are in that regards. And then also we looked outside the state boundary, and with the assistance and recommendation of the MAG, we selected, determined, or agreed upon 5 peer reviews throughout the country, peer agencies that the guys interviewed and met with to gather information there, just to see as a comparison, or be able to use as a comparison what technologies they're using, how their governance is set up, what their funding looks like, their size, their call volumes, things like that. So there's a tremendous amount of information that the guys gathered in those interviews that we'll then be using all of this information compiled together for the final recommendations and options report. All right, at this time, I think I'm going to hand it off to Eric. I think he's starting up first here. Eric, over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Scott. So what we're going to do is walk through this PowerPoint, and this first slide kind of shows what we were wanting to talk about with the 8 various agency interviews. We tried at each location to talk to someone who was involved with the PSAP, someone who is an operational commander, or who is one of the stakeholders in terms of the response. And then we also wanted to speak with city manager or town manager with regard to those topics. And you can see them there. Those are the things that we discussed. Okay, Steve, you're up.
Thanks, Eric.
So one of the next step, if you look at the screen there, you'll see a network map that we got from MR911. It's a little bit old, and we've got there are a couple of changes we're going to talk about. But one of the things important to know is that what you have with MR911 right now is a completely data-driven network, not a traditional enhanced 911 network as we're used to, but one that's been digital for quite a while and delivers calls using IP selective routing, which is not the traditional. It's an improvement over what we all had when the incumbent phone systems were delivering it. The map's a little inaccurate because it's just a little bit older, and what's changed in the interim is that the call delivery coming into your network nowadays is been consolidated or aggregated by Intelligent. You call it Cinch now, that delivers the calls into the network. Other than that, though, the ideas within the drawing here are pretty accurate, and they show that what you have is a core that's running IP that is routing calls and delivering them over a highly secure and highly redundant network to all of the PSAPs. That's the crux of this one. One of the items that I wanted to talk about, though, was that in a fully formed I3, that's a NINA term for a completely next generation 911 compliant solution. You'll see a very different concept of how calls are going to be delivered to what we call points of interconnection or POIs. And that is the biggest change that you'd be seeing coming up. If we could put the next slide up, please. I think this is your turn.
This is mine. Pardon me. Okay, this slide deals with what we found with regard to network diversity. There are three things we looked at here, and these three things are all measured against the National Emergency Number Association I3 standard for next generation 911. We found that at the first point there, that the system is very reliable and it meets the criteria. Resilience means whether it's scalable, how it would handle, major spikes in call volume, for example. We found that the network is resilient in that aspect. And with regard to redundancy, it's very redundant. There are at least three various signal pathways to each piece application. So any questions on any of this stuff? Again, it was compared to the NINA I3 standard. So this is kind of good news for you guys for MR911. Okay. Steve.
All right. With regard to data center technology, we talked to the MR911 folks. They showed us evidence about the equipment and the data centers they're using, and we viewed both data centers, obviously, to take a look at where your 911 call traffic is routed and what happens with it. We found that both of the data centers are current and up to date, both for issues of security, meeting the I3 requirements from NINA, but also for stability. Interestingly, while there are some issues we're going to talk about later on in this discussion, one of the things that, and I'm jumping ahead here just a bit, is that during the interviews we didn't get any indications from any significant indications from PSAPs there were issues regarding the stability of the SENet or the 911 call delivery. It's important to understand, once again, that we're not talking about I3 call delivery yet, because the functional elements of I3 are not turned on for reasons we'll go into in a minute. But in terms of its stability, there were no questions, and nor were issues were raised with us that were significant. Next slide, please.
But I wanted to speak to that. Back that slide up once, because
Thanks.
with regard to the data center technology, we heard anecdotally that the MR911 technology was out of date. So one of the things we wanted to make sure when we did sit and have our interview with MR911 is we asked this question specifically, is that tell us about your servers, tell us about the newness of the equipment that's operating the system. And we were assured that everything is up to date and operating the most current standards of technology. So we wanted to make sure that we had that one nailed. So next slide.
This was for you, Eric.
We're tag teaming this, so. All right. So this is the call handling solution, sometimes called the CHS or sometimes called the CHE. And we were made well aware that there was a glitch with a patch that was applied to the Viper system, which is the predominant call handling solution with regard to MR 911. That and I would venture to say that MR 911 wasn't unique in that version 7 patch that went horribly wrong. That there were other agencies across the country that had experienced the same thing, which was, again, it was an upgrade that was provided by Entrado. And there were some, mostly I think call transfer issues that arose out of that patch, which as you can see there have since been resolved. And there were no other stability issues raised with regard to the call handling solution. All right, continuing on. We did find that support for the current system does vary from PSAP to PSAP. And we found that, at least anecdotally, that the larger PSAPs were getting slightly preferred attention, preferred service, if you like. And when we talked to MR 911, they said, yeah, we are close to the larger PSAPs. We have technicians that are assigned to these PSAPs. And so when something goes wrong, those PSAPs are usually, they get a slightly higher level of service than, say, the smaller PSAPs. So that was one thing that was reported. The other thing that came to light, which is part of the support issue that was identified to us, is that there had, like in every other industry, there's been turnover, and some of the newer technicians that were hired weren't as familiar with the system and with some of the PSAPs that the more tenured technicians were that had since retired and gone to pension.
I'd like to add something to that too. Having gone through in my own state, a enhanced 911 to NG 911 changeover, there's an attachment that our PSAPs, my PSAPs, had to the technicians they were used to having from the incumbents at the time. And we attempted in our contracting with the NG 191 provider to actually maintain some sort of continuity of service going back to them. But it's impossible to ignore the fact that larger PSAPs are more needy. They will have more problems. We're not saying the system as it's currently running has problems, but that because you have more calls and because you have people involved, and a lot of these are people and interface issues, a very large PSAP like Phoenix PD or Phoenix Fire versus a very small PSAP will be getting a lot of service from MR 911, but that's to be expected. And it's something that we've seen across the country, and it's perfectly natural. But it may give the impression to certain PSAPs that people are getting preference because of where they're located or who they are. And that is really not the issue that we saw.
Any questions or comments, anything so far?
Yeah, it's just a question, Brent
Yeah.
from Glendale. How do you define a large PSAP from a smaller PSAP? What does that mean?
Well, generally speaking, the PSAPs are, I'll do this from the other way around. A smaller PSAP would say have 2 operating positions. Okay, that would be defined as a smaller PSAP. A medium-sized PSAP would have perhaps 5 to 10 operating positions, maybe some that would be dedicated to call taking, some dedicated to dispatch. And then the larger PSAPs would be whatever above that number count, where you would have dedicated call takers, dedicated dispatchers.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, you're welcome. Thanks, Steve.
All right. I want to talk about trouble ticket reporting for a moment. The current system that MRU 911 uses to report problems is an email system. And progresses and updates to the problems are tracked using the same email string. Almost without exception, ECC managers reported a degree of frustration when attempting to monitor the status or resolution of the problem. That's what the text says. There's a way to get your problems into the system here. So using email, and one of the issues really is there was no easy way described to us for PSAP managers to track the progress of their trouble ticket. They could look at the emails. And the problem is that the system automatically adds the email to a string of emails, and so it wasn't obvious to PSAP managers what was going on. Occasionally, because and we don't know where the cause of the problem is, occasionally in that type of system, it occurred here that problems were shown as resolved and the PSAP manager didn't know they were resolved, and they complained that the reason it was that they didn't know that that the call or the ticket had been closed was because it was buried in a long line of email messages.
So I'll jump in here real quick if you don't mind, Steve.
Please.
Do you mind if I interrupt you?
Uh,
I'm going to interrupt you anyway. This is something that this was identified as a pretty common thing across the board. So when we get to our peer review part of this report, I think it's worthy to note here that out of the 5 peer review agencies, 4 of them had a dashboard style trouble reporting system where it was very plain and easy to use, very intuitive, and a PSAP could go in and look to see what the status, easily look at this dashboard approach, which is the MR911 system is kind of we got to search through an email string to see what's going on. And the system, and Steve, you mentioned this, the system is difficult to tell whether or not a resolution has actually been, has the problem been fixed, kind of thing. So we're one of the things that that we wanted to make sure that we pointed that out. Okay, sorry.
Next. This would be you, Eric.
Okay, this is me. All right, so let's have a look at the capabilities of the system. When it comes to Enhanced 911, now Enhanced 911 is the precursor to next generation 911. So Enhanced 911, if we're talking in the context of that the MR911 system includes all those necessary needed to find elements for Enhanced 911. The other thing here is that we note that it's important to point out that agencies that have left or in planning to leave the MR911 system may run into call transfer issues. If you're part of the umbrella organization, if you're part of the MR911 system, call transfers are occurring within the system. Any agency that's outside of the system that needs to do a call transfer back into the system, the technology is going to be slightly different, slightly more cumbersome, and done through the switch telephone network. Is that an accurate depiction?
Yeah, I'd like to add that although it sounds like it's real simple, just change the order for in the system for the speed dial button for transfer. It's actually pretty cumbersome at the operator level. And although the changes that would need to happen to each of the call handling solutions are easily laid out. It's not rocket science. It's the repetitiveness of having to do it over and over again that causes problems. Whenever we do a cutover anywhere across the country, traditionally one of the problems we'll have and one of the checklist items that takes us so longer to nail down is getting transfers to work correctly from the new PSAP. So for every PSAP that were to leave and go directly to the Arizona system, there has to be programming that's correct for their equipment. Now that's CHABB new, but for every MR911 PSAP that's remaining within the network, a reprogramming for every one of them is going to happen as well. It's not trivial. It's going to require truck rolls and visits. So I don't want to minimize it just because it seems like, oh, it's call transfer. It's easy. Yeah, it's easy on paper, but it's not easy in practice. You have mapping.
Yeah, and next point on this slide is the mapping. And as you can see, we've said that MR911 does provide an enterprise mapping solution. However, that's not the preferred map. And there is a typo there where it says the mapping solution provided by the CHS. That should read as CAD. That's a typo. I made that mistake. I'll follow my sword on that one. So the preferred map is the CAD system, although there Rapid SOS, which has been provided at every position, is also one of the over-the-top applications that also gets a lot of use. So
I'd like to add that this is not to say anything bad about the MR911 map. As a matter of fact, the MR911 map is one of the big things that MR911, when it on its outset provided. You remember what our world was like at the time when MR911 started, and a countywide map available to all the PSAPs was revolutionary. And it was something that the PSAPs badly needed and weren't getting from, at that time, I think it was Quest, that would work correctly for them, that they would. It was a huge improvement. What's happened is that we've had a rapid change over the past couple of years with alternative mapping technologies, and you're seeing PSAPs that are preferring to use the rapid SOS map or their CAD map instead of the MR911 map. That mapping will always be a part of what MR911 does, because as a part of next generation 911, it's a map-driven system. There always has to be a map, and so we anticipate that going forward, there would be a change that would occur in the point of view of the dispatch centers towards it. But this is something we wanted you to know, that they weren't really using the map at the moment, a lot of them.
Yeah, and as we get to what they call location-based routing, mapping is going to be one of the most important components of the migration to next generation 911. And you guys are in pretty good shape when it comes to maps overall. But location-based routing is kind of going to be the way that calls are routed. So you have a PSAP that has a geographic footprint called a shapefile. If a 911 call is placed from within that footprint, then the location information is coming from the device. And that is the factor that provides the routing to the correct PSAP. Next slide, please. And so continuing on just a little bit, rapid SOS, I mentioned that just a moment ago. It's active in all call taking positions. It's not necessarily always used, but it's active and it's there and it's available. ACD is automatic call distribution. ACD is used throughout the system, and there were no reported issues with that, and no reported issues with call routing.
Yeah, I want to emphasize that MR911's been pretty good about customization for PSAPs in that regard. There are often issues when you have a system-wide ACD, such as they have, in dealing with smaller, to use your term, smaller PSAPs. But we visited a couple of the smaller PSAPs where MR911 was able to make it ring square for them while still having ACD working correctly in the larger centers. Ringing square mean it 911 calls ring at every position at the same time, which is what very small centers like to have.
Okay, next slide. This is you.
No, all the ECCs that we met had contingency policies and plans in place. So they had overflow plans because of either spikes in the call volume or because they literally weren't there. If staff shortages are a real issue in our state, obviously, and in the Valley, or in instances where they've had to abandon because the PSAP is not operating anymore. But there was a change in the traditional 911 systems that we all know and love in the E911 days before IP selective routing. The method of telling the phone company, if you will, that your PSAP's no longer available for calls was literally a switch connected with the wires that signaled something that you weren't there anymore, which caused all of the calls to cut over. It was a well understood and simple system that worked. Nowadays, and by the way, this is not uncommon, this happens in other parts of the country, the only way to ensure that all of your calls go to your designated backup or backups is for every position to be logged off. And that can create a problem if the place is on fire and you're on your way out. And somewhere at the network level, something has to intervene in order for it to occur if you don't do that. So we just wanted to note, it was pointed out to us at a couple of PSAPs that they'd lost that facility. About it. Any questions on that? All right, we're going to talk about funding here. So 2 years ago, it's probably a little bit more than 2 years ago, right, Liz? The state changed to a grant-based system. It required MR911, rather than the system in the past, to apply for funding in a grant format with the state. So MR911 went from, well, pretty much effectively was a pre-funded model to a reimbursement model, and they had to do it mid-budget cycle, which created stress on the MR911 team. We inserted a note here because we thought it was appropriate. It didn't improve relationships between MR911 and the state at that point. And it didn't it didn't make it easy for the following years for budget preparation because of the way the cycle works and the timing of how grant applications are put in and awarded in terms of how money happens here. You all are aware that you all reached an agreement with the city of Phoenix way back when MR 911 was founded, and City of Phoenix became the lead agency, a contractor, if you will, to MAG to provide 911 services. And on the basis of that, you've been going forward and what's happened is there's been a change to how the year-to-year financing occurs. We're not saying whether that's good or bad. That's not the purpose or our scope. It's just to point out that that change happened. Something that affects everything going forward, and it's no secret to this committee, certainly anyone in the community knows, that the surcharge rate in Arizona is in the lowest percentile in the country. And that affects every decision that's made going forward, both from the state point of view and certainly from MR 911. Because MR 911 is one step removed from the source of the funding, the state, it constrains them in a way that may not be normal for a PSAP or PSAP group to operate. And it may create a perception, and that's why we have the bullet on that, that the unwillingness of MR 911 to provide a specific feature that a PSAP may be asking for is due to the tightness of the budget and not due to other reasons that have nothing to do with the amount of money or whether that feature or functionality should be available to the PSAP. And it also drives the perception that larger ECCs get better service from MR 911. That is more of a historical affect that we see. Those of you who are around way back at the beginning, and there aren't too many of us who are that old, but I could certainly count myself in there. We understood where MR 911 came from and what life was like under Quest. A lot of the group that's out managing our PSAPs and managing the towns and cities are not privy to a lot of the information that we knew back then. And so the history of how and why we do things, I'm identifying with MAG, why you do things, is kind of lost. And so I think it's important that we brought up the fact that perceptions drive reality in many cases. Folks think they know what happened when in fact they haven't been around long enough to know what did happen. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. And I think it's also fair to say that one of the things that came out of our peer review is, and when we get to that, we're going to get to it in a bit here, but some of the 911 entities or the peer review agencies that we looked at are completely funded 100% by surcharge. And so we're going to go through that. And Liz, Audrey, did I send you the NINA charge chart with okay, I got to send that to you. NINA has on their website, they have a kind of a table that shows all the funding, 911 funding for all the states. And we'll provide that to you, just kind of give you an idea as to where you guys stand in terms of all the other states. I just wanted to throw that in there.
Can I ask a question real quick, going back to this idea? Because when you look at whenever the state made their change to go to a grant-based system, I don't know if that's the same time when they had finished their RFP on the NG 911 and looking at, trying to create a statewide, compatible system going to the NG 911 and then recognizing under that contract that they had received or that they entered into, that there's a material difference between the cost of services under their current contract with AT&T versus the way that we're currently doing the services. Meaning there's a very difference of the, well, obviously the technology because it's cloud-based versus having servers sitting at the location, but probably just as much, I guess it's probably part of providing the service to those servers is the tremendous amount of additional staffing that's required. And so I guess my point is when we're talking about these differences about the states looking at and what we have, they're materially different, it seems to me in some ways, as far as just the process, the idea of how they're set up. And one is very much, kind of remote kind of hosting that's, you're paying for a license that sits off in some dead data center somewhere versus having every PSAP having their own server sitting somewhere in the room and then having to have that being maintained and served. So how do you reconcile that issue? Do you reconcile that later, or because we're talking about these differences, I mean, materially for the state, they're looking at it, I think, I would assume, based on the current contract they have with AT&T, which is a completely different model, completely different setup than where we are today. And I don't know how we try to reconcile those two.
There's a couple pieces to that. Obviously, I'll address part of it, and I'm gonna probably try to dump some of it on Eric if I can. On the first, I probably dispute, or I disagree that there's a real connection between the changeover to the grant-based system and the contract with AT&T. I think that there was pressure within the state to go to grant-based system that was coming from elsewhere, but that the conflict, they happened to occur at the same time as the state was working on it. Certainly ADOA, in our opinion, has a goal in mind, and the way they're looking at how to provide services through the money that they control is driving decisions they're making. But I would say that the idea to go to grant-based funding probably was not we certainly didn't get any indication that that was why they went to that model.
Okay.
But the second part of what you brought up is a very good point. The difference between a cloud-based solution to providing NG 911 to your clients versus host-based solution. The solution that MR 911 is planning to provide for next generation 911 is cloud-based. It's just within MR 911. The services are provided from the core. So I don't see a whole lot of difference there, except for how and this we will be going into first of all in our recommendations at the end, but also the issue of how to meld a MR 911 into a cohesive 911 system that the state is providing and make it work as a network of networks, and making MR 911 part of it is certainly one of the options. And you can't have serious differences of how the network construction happens and meld those. We all will need to agree on what's the method going forward for the provision of services. Next is how you decide what part MR 911 plays in that, and is there value to MR 911 to being a part of that system that the state has decided they're going to set up, and can we provide value back to them? Does it work for us? I think that's going to be an interesting part of this options that we offer you.
Yeah, and I'll say my experience overseeing the state of Utah for 5 years is we did have a grant system, and I think that the grant system, the way it's set up here, is not uncommon across the nation. The difference being, at least if I can speak my own experience with that, is that we in the state of Utah had a 911 committee that would adjudicate the grant applications. So a certain amount of funding that came in from the surcharges automatically went to the PSAPs based on a funding formula. And then there was, on top of that, was the grant system, where a PSAP could come in if they're ready to do a system upgrade every 5 years, or they wanted to put in texting or whatever. They would do a grant application, and that would come in, and we knew how much money we had to spend, or we had to available for those grants. And then the grant applications were adjudicated by this 911 committee that was comprised of PSAP managers, basically. So just a little bit of background on that. So that's it. What's next?
All right, we're funny, we're just talking about governance a little bit. So this is information that you probably don't need, but it's needed for the completeness in the report. MAG does provide governance for MR 911. Obviously, MR 911 is a creature of MAG, so it would. There are 3 committees that you know about. The first one actually is now called the MAG 911 Study Committee. It had a different name at the very beginning, but became what you all are, the representatives from member agencies. And then I think it was the 2013 timeframe, maybe it was 2010. I didn't put the note down, Liz. A 911 oversight committee was created, which was an executive level addition,
2004.
2004. So I'm completely wrong. Thank you. The officials from police, fire department, members of MR 911 that provided executive level oversight. And the third and last group of the three was the public safety answering point managers group, which provides input from the people who are actually running our agencies regarding the technical needs of MR 911 and provides coordination. So those are the three that you have, and you all know about them, but we had to put it in the report for completeness. Next slide, Eric. It's you.
Okay. So we've already covered that first one, the call transfer issue. The second thing, the administrative call transfer, didn't appear to be a problem with the exception of one PSAP. So we just threw that in there so you could have a look at it. Whereas in situations where a wireless device, a cell phone, had made a 911 call and it was a hang up call, if the PSAP called the number back, called that cell phone back to see what was going on, they would have to do that using an administrative line. If somebody picked up and actually answered, and they needed some further, say a call transfer to another agency or something, the capability was not there in that particular PSAP to be able to easily transfer that call. So the callers were told, we're going to hang up here. You're going to call 911 again. And when your call actually comes in through the proper routing, then we'll be able to deal with that particular issue. So, and we're not sure whether that is an MR 911 deal or whether it was a programming or some kind of quirk at the local PSAP level, but we thought we'd throw that in there anyway. Okay, next. Okay, Steve, you're going to help me out here.
Sure.
Okay, so the state agency interview took place 11th. We met with several folks from Arizona DOA. That took place on April 11th. And then the peer review agency interviews followed that. And we did those basically starting the beginning of this month. And you can see the 5 peer review agencies that we interviewed there, Charlton County. And I've got a slide for each one of those that we're going to kind of dig in and give you kind of a very high level view of what's going on with those peer review agencies. Next slide, please. All right. Available technology options. Audrey alluded to the fact that there's to be a table produced that provides some options. That table is actually going to be part of the third phase of this study, where we actually get into recommendations. We felt it was easier when we get to the recommendations part of this study that those technology options be kind of folded into the recommendations that we're going to be making. But it's important to point out here that right now MR 911 is not fully next generation 911 operational, as it were, that there's a core service migration that has been put on hold. And so it's pretty much status quo, and to enable to for MR 911 to actually get to a true I3 next generation 911 functional network, that has to happen. The other point here is that there was kind of the dominant call handling solution within the system is the Viper system. However, there is one large agency that does use the Vesta, which is the other call handling solution, which should be noted that both of those call handling solution options are available through the state, through the state 911 system. And the other thing is the AT&T contract that again is kind of what the state is using to provide all these other the options that aren't necessarily available right now in MR 911. What did you want to add to that?
So I have to turn my mic on, apologies. So now the state is, we're just looking at two things here before we go into the peers and trying to set up for what we're comparing with, right? So in the case of, as Eric mentioned, in the case of MR 911, because we're stalled on the implementation of it, next generation core services on the MR 911 network, which was originally due according to the state plan by December of 2022. We're comparing with a state 911 system with a contract that is already signed and available. The state 911 contract is providing 3 network connections to each of their PSAPs and 2 call handling options. So the very basics of it before we go into the comparison with the peers is that you can subscribe with the state and receive the network connections and have your choice of either Viper or Vesta. And if you are choosing the Vesta solution because it's available now, you can also receive a transcription option, which is a part of the latest iteration of the Vesta product. You'll see transcription referred to when we're talking about some of the peers. That's why I brought it up.
Okay. Any questions so far on any of this that we've talked about? Okay, so we're going to jump into the peer review findings. And we're going to start with Charleston County, which is the least similar to MR 911. As we go through these, I'm going to ask that you guys kind of focus in on the budget, as well as the number of full-time employees associated to each one of these agencies. This first one, Charleston County, they're funded on a 62 cents per line. Least similar, they support their consolidated center. So you have this county that had all the various PSAPs that were consolidated into one. And that's, you can see there are 17 agencies. They do have a countywide EZNet. It's not I3 compliant, but it is highly reliable and resilient. They do have hot seating. One of the things we looked at and made sure that we covered was the ability to hot seat. Hot seat means that if there's a failure anywhere in the system, that you can go to where there's a network connection with a laptop or whatever and be able to log in and have full functional capability.
Or if you're overwhelmed at your center and you have an agreement with your neighbor center to set somebody down at a seat to help out.
Right. And these guys use Go kits. When you see a Go kit, that usually means it's a packet, it's a laptop of some kind that you can grab and go kind of thing and set yourself up for call taking. So we thought that was important that we point that out as we did our peer review. And I'll tell you right now, there's a narrative for each one of these that's in the report that goes into much more gory detail than what we're providing here. This is just, we know we're on a bit of a time constraint here, but this is kind of like the 50,000 foot view. And you can see their total call volume is 518,000 calls a year. There's their budget. There's their 173 full-time employees. And they're suffering with vacancy rate of 34%. All right, next slide. Charlotte Mecklenburg Police is another South Carolina agency. They're partially similar to you guys. They have 4 PSAPs, 1 primary, 2 secondary, 1 for fire, 1 for medical, and then they have a backup PSAP, which serves as a backup as well as a training facility. Their EZNet is provided by the city of Charlotte. They have 2 data centers, not I3 compliant. They have a system that they report is very highly reliable and resilient. They use the Viper call handling solution, the 5.1. You guys, with all the problem you had, that was with the 7 version. So they haven't gone to the 7 version just yet because they heard it was problematic. So they do have hot seating and remote call taking using Go kits. What they do have on site on their city operation, so it'd be like their PSAPs are kind of in a regional area. They have 2 full-time Entrado techs that are on site, and that's all they do is look after the system. And they have one full-time Hexagon technician. Hexagon is their computer-aided dispatch solution. They do about 1 million calls a year. Their budget is 8 million. And then you can see the personnel breakdown. CPD is the primary PSAP. They have 149 with 9 vacancies. And then the fire and the medic secondaries are there as well. Again, this is kind of high level. Again, they're 62 cents per subscriber line, which is the state rate. Yep.
It says 518.
Oh, that's a typo. You guys got the wrong version of the PowerPoint. That's an error that we, that's wrong. That should be 1 million calls. We'll get you the right version of the PowerPoint. There are the odd little thing in there that,
It'll get you.
copy and paste to get you. All right. Greater Harris County. Greater Harris County is the region around Dallas in Texas.
Around Houston.
Or sorry, around
Houston.
Houston. I'll be all right. I used to live in Dallas. I've got Dallas on the brain. So similar, somewhat similar to you, but they're a total in-house operation. They do everything in-house. They have a NOC. They run their own tier 5 data center. Tier 5 means that's the highest you can get in the data center world. They have 2 of those things. They support 49 cities. This is big. We're talking Texas here, 2 counties, 30 primary PSAPs, 7 secondaries, and 1,200 call takers. So this is this would be the Cadillac as big as, Texas. All right. So they are I3 compliant. They have, as I said, a dedicated in-house NOC. That's a network operation center that operates 24/7. They have 3 connectivity pathways plus microwave, making it a 4th. It's extremely reliable and resilient. They have 380 workstations. They have the hot seating using Go kits. Call volume 5 million calls a year.
What is ours? So what, when you put that number up, I'm just curious what we say here. What's ours?
Off the top of my head, I can't.
3 million.
The total state take is 20 million. The total 911 take here for MR 911 is around 3.1.
Yeah.
They have a much higher surcharge. They're not charging 20 cents.
Yeah, their budget is 54 million. They have 48 full-time employees and they're operating on 50 cents, 50 cents per subscriber line plus 2% prepaid, which means that if you're buying a burner phone, like from Walmart or whatever, that there's a sales tax there, 2%. What are you laughing at?
Burner phone.
Burner phone. Do you? Did you pay your?
Something interesting to add, and it's actually a feature that could work for us here in Maricopa County. It's only 50 cents instead of, you might expect that with this kind of budget to be even higher, but Harris County is unbelievably populated. It's a very large population center. And so they're able to get an awful lot of income from that 50 cents.
But it's also a massive area with lots of natural disasters.
Yes.
You betcha. And bad weather.
Yeah.
Like weather that clears off subdivisions. Okay, King County. King County is the most similar to MR 911. Supports 12 PSAPs or ECCs. They're in the process of migrating to an EZNet. They have their EZNet as operational, but it's still in the testing mode. And when we did our interview, which was last week, they were testing one PSAP on the network. So it's very much in transition. They are going to be having or have set up 3 different data centers or tier 4 data centers, which is one notch below tier 5. 2 of the data centers are within the county. One is within Western Washington. They have 3 connectivity pathways plus microwave to every PSAP. They're using a hosted Viper with 250 workstations. Again, they have hot seating and remote call taking using Go kits, but they haven't done it yet because they're still migrating, but they're all set to go with those things. Their system was described by being over-engineered. So they have intentionally over-engineered their county EZNet because they plan to onboard neighboring counties and bring them into their system. The
Can I
total
ask
call volume is 5 million, sir.
Can I ask a question on
Sure.
you say three tier 4 data centers.
Yes.
So they have their own data centers to host their support. For the
It's a
system?
managed service contract with Intrado.
Yeah. So Intrado has the data centers.
Oh, okay.
And under contract, they're required to provide 3. And they needed, one of the requirements was one of them had to be out of King County,
One of them had to be out of.
out of King
Yeah, so
County.
if you see there's,
They're in the Cascadia Fault area, so they
Right,
wanted one
okay.
out.
So when you compare that to other options, like for example, what the state's offering, the idea is that all that's being hosted, they could be data centers that could be in different states. Is that, how do you count that? Because it could be, I mean, it could be anywhere, right? It could be in Dallas, it could be in Phoenix, it could be who knows where else.
From a planning point of view, there is value in having, there's competing values. There is much value in having widely separated data centers, so the same natural disaster doesn't take out both or all of them. There's also value in having jobs that are inside your state when you're buying something very expensive like that. And so you want to sign your contracts so that you require whatever your municipalities are comfortable with on where your money goes. There isn't any necessarily and I don't know if there are any numbers in this, Eric. There isn't any number that says if I get more than 1,000 miles away, I'm better off. Actually, King County people talked about that because we asked them the question, why don't you have an out of state data center? Then if you have 3 total, why go to the middle of the state? And their contention was that if it took out all 3 of us, including the central Washington state, we're not going to be receiving 911 calls because we won't be able to get any. A disaster that volume that would take them all out was something that funding an additional data center out of state wouldn't have solved that problem because they would have no PSAPs to deliver the
And so you
calls
use
to.
the word data center. So are they actually funding the entire data center versus leasing space inside a data
Yeah,
center?
they very well may be leasing space inside the data center. The
Okay.
contract will call for it to be a tier 4 data center, but it doesn't require that it be dedicated only to them.
Okay.
yeah, and there's still the kind of the notion or the feeling that a data center that's way far away somewhere is maybe not as reliable than something that's physically or geographically closer. So it becomes a bit of a trade-off, really. And in the case of Washington, Seattle, and the earthquake and all that, all the stuff that can happen to them, is that they wanted to make sure that they had some other option available that was not right, kind of close to where the action was, kind of thing. So, okay, they have the highest subscriber. They're 95 cents per, all right. And that's 95 cents for each access line, as well as 95 cents for point of sale. So you buy the burner phone that you're going to be paying. That's your charge right there, kind of thing. So their total call volume, 5 million, I think I said that. They're on a managed services contract with Intrado, talked about that. Includes the Intrado NOC, the Intrado NOC is going to be monitoring their network. They have a startup fee of 2.5 million. And then their annual managed service contract right now is for 4 million a year.
So what was interesting about this one to us is they're a cohort that looks an awful lot like Harris County if Harris County were to contract the entire thing out. So we do have example of one where it's completely in-house, funded by the county or counties, because Harris County has one more county added to it. And the call volumes are similar. And the idea in their head about how they went about it was completely different. So it's going to be a good point of comparison when we're showing you options.
The last one, North Central Texas 911, is somewhat similar. They have what they call a mesh EZNet, which is made up of various providers like Comcast. They have 2 what they call load balanced data centers, which means they're active balancing the load of all the call volume. Support 40 communication centers, 600 call takers. They have an EZNet that is I3 compliant, consisting of 2 tier 5 data centers. There again, they have 3 connectivity paths plus a microwave. There is no NOC though. They use software programs to monitor the network status. They do have dedicated technicians that are on call 24/7. They are using a Solacom Guardian call handling solution, which is not that common, but thought worthy of mention. They have 380 workstations that they support. They do have hot seating available, but they've never actually used it, which we found kind of interesting. You know, they have it, but we've never used it because we've never had to use it. Is
Because they
basically.
are in Harris County.
So their call volume is just short of 1 million, and you can see what their budget is there with 35 full-time employees. And their subscriber rate is 50 cents per line with a 2% point of sale. And that kind of wraps up the Steve and Eric show here. So Scott, if you're still on the line, we'll kick it back over to you to put a bow on it.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Well done. I appreciate it. And right now, I'll open up the floor to any questions, additional questions that you may have for Steve and Eric. And I just want to reiterate that, thanking everybody for their time today for us to sit in on your call here and present this information to you. Of course, following up with the report, and just putting a plug out there that the final report of options is scheduled to be delivered. I believe it's June the 9th. So that will be the next deliverable that'll be coming down for everyone to review.
Thank you, Scott. Any questions? Kevin?
Hey, thanks. I've got a number of questions. I'll just take it kind of the order I wrote them down. So no order of importance here by any stretch. So what tier is our MR 911 data center? You referenced the different tiers that are there. I didn't see it in the report. What tier are we?
You want to take a stab at this?
Tier 4.
Yeah.
Tier 4 would be the closest, I think.
There's a specific list of requirements for tier 3, 4, and 5 data centers. Probably MR 911 comes closest to a 4. But data centers, the data center requirements are unique. And that, I mean, normally buildings are purpose-built and only have data centers in them. And so our data centers are co-located. One is at the backup fire dispatch headquarters, at headquarters on just south of, it's actually just east of here. And the other is located in Mesa, and they're in buildings that have other functions in them. But if you were to strip away the fire functions, they look like class 4 data centers with us. They have the required power, separate HVAC, and security requirements that make it a class 4.
Okay. Then does NENA have standards regarding data center locations as it relates to redundancy? Because I thought they did.
That's a good question, and I'm not sure. I'll have to find out. The NENA I3 standard talks about redundancy, reliability, scalability. But off the top of my head, I don't know if it addresses the actual data center tier levels. I'd have to double check that, if that's your question.
Well, yeah, I think what prompted a little bit is the trade-off statement that was made, one about being, the physical distance, maybe has some advantages from a safety perspective, but a disadvantage from having jobs being outside the area. And I've never saw a standard where NENA is concerned about the local economy when it comes to setting their standard.
Yeah.
Because within the private sector world, they would argue against what King County has said. I will assure you that, and I come from that area, Microsoft does not keep all of their data centers and key components of their network in the state of Washington. They do it throughout, not just this country, obviously even parts around the world. So I was just a little bit taken back by that, because that seems to counter what I've always understood, which is that if the more geographical distance you can put between your data centers for redundancy, there is an inherent safety advantage, maybe minute, but that generally is the standard.
Let me insert here that was not, King County did not give us that as the reason. That was something I inserted as a possible reason for what they're thinking. It would be more likely than in King County's case. There's a level of comfort that public safety agencies have with controlling the assets. And specifically with regard to, as much as possible, the connectivity. So you're right I'm trying to phrase this so it makes the most sense. There's a point at which the distance that you get doesn't provide you any more advantage if you go any further. And I would presume that by remaining in the state of Washington in an area where they were more likely to be able to control the quality of the connections they have to their backup center, that would make them more comfortable than being at the mercy of a national provider where they're buying circuits across country. In the case of Microsoft, who has customers all over the country, it would make sense that they would be way more distributed, or Amazon with their Amazon Web Services located all over. But the only customers of King County are in King County. So that may have influenced your decision. But I don't want to impugn our friends from King County. They didn't give me the idea that it was because they're trying to keep jobs inside the state. That was ours.
Yeah, and I would agree that, the statement of, how far away you start losing any kind of benefit, but there's also not generally a significant cost component to be farther away either. The cost of having a redundant center in Denver would be very similar to the cost of having a redundant center in Dallas or in West Virginia, as an example.
Agreed.
Okay. So then going on to the mapping, would you say that the current mapping that we use in MR 911 because of is an inherent, or not inherent, but is a weakness that could be improved upon currently? I had a hard time really picking up what you were trying to say on that recommendation.
I'll start off. Maybe I know Eric's got mapping opinions. I was struck by what I had read in the history of how MR 911 started and how important the map that they delivered was. Because at the time that MR 911 delivered the map, that was the first time all of our PSAPs had access to something that good at the time. So the difference between what will be with NG 911 versus what's there now, which is effectively a IP-driven E911 system, and the map that's associated with it, can be a world of difference. The most critical thing in my mind when you're deciding to go to the I-3 road is good maps. GIS is the core component of next generation 911. In a location routed system that's based upon polygons and maps and points on maps, the map has to be extremely accurate. So I'm thinking that this problem solves itself as we move up to an accurate, a more fully integrated map with next generation 911. That doesn't mean that it solves the thing that we noticed, which is they weren't using the map, because MR 911, as it goes forward, has no choice but to maintain a map because it's the basis. It's going to always be there. Whether or not it has enough bells and whistles to satisfy the PSAP community in order to use it, I think is less important than integrating all of the maps so that there's one solution presented to the users inside the PSAP. That's really tough for you all to do now because you don't provide a region-wide CAD. Everyone has their own CAD, and when everybody has their own CAD, and CADs are also map-driven, you're always going to have this dichotomy. There will always be a version difference between what MR 911 can provide and what they're using. So I don't have a solution for it, but it really doesn't matter. We were pointing out something of interest, yet you'll never be able to get away from doing a map if you're an NG911 provider. You have to have one, has to be accurate. You already have one. You have an advantage that the county has an excellent GIS system in place with all its municipalities contributing.
And as a follow-up to that, then contrast that then to what you know about the state manages services. How is their solution for that? And is that impacted in this decision? Does that solve itself? Or is the same type of issues that will be present if we were to go to managed services through the state contract?
We did not ask a lot of questions of the state of what is the level of GIS involvement you would require from MR 911 as part of this, because there can only be one layer for each of the things that goes on. There can't be two different interpretations of reality. So I've got to presume that the map that the state would use for Scottsdale, for example, has to be the same layers that Scottsdale provided to MR 911. It would have to be the same. So in quality, in terms of qualitatively, it wouldn't be any different.
And were you going to say, I thought you said both of you may were going to have a response. I'm good with the response if you,
Well, what we found, again, not to get too far out of our scope, but we were primarily tasked with looking at mapping within or within Maricopa County, and not to disparage or say that the MR 911 map or the solution, their mapping solution that would come with the call handling equipment is not that it's substandard. That's not what we meant. We meant that the CAD systems do a better job of displaying the map, and that was the preferred map that was used, that is being used by the call takers. And along with Rapid SOS, where they need to have a slightly more accurate depiction of where the caller is coming from, Rapid SOS also offers some other features. So that's kind of what we meant. If you kind of took it the wrong way.
no, I was not
Yeah.
100%.
I think it's fair to say that when you're able to overlay the actual incidents and the units because you're running a vehicle location system on top of the map that's displaying the call, that's of more value to the telecommunicators. That simply wasn't available at the time MR 911 moved over. And that's why I said what I said before, which is it's going to be the integration of the maps into some single solution in that happy future when we're all on top of the mountain that telecommunicators will need in order to do it. And that point becomes moot.
Great. Regarding the funding conversation, some of this may be outside of your scope or ability to project, but two questions. One, was there any look at the impact on the existing MR 911 members regarding funding as other members start to peel off and go to the state managed services? Did you look at any type of what the impact would be? Would there still be adequate state funding? I guess we don't know for sure because it's a grant process, but was there any analysis done to say if MR 911 reduces down to 3 agencies, what would be the funding impact on those agencies?
There wasn't in the report you have now, but it is a consideration in our options because there's X amount of money. We suffer, as you all do, from the problem that in our state, we don't have a per position or per person allocation of the charges or per person per call or some formula. You'll note that in our peer reviews, pretty much every one of those places has there's a formula and they know pretty predictably what it's going to be, which predictability makes for good budgeting. Good budgeting means that we can do things when we plan to. So we're going to address it because it absolutely is a part of our report, but we won't have very much information because of the unknowability of how the grant process is going to react to this.
And the other thing is too, is this was the goalpost kept moving when we first started into the project. You know, there was kind of who was there and who was still in. And then as we went through the project, as you know, that there was decisions made for certain entities to leave, which kind of threw a little bit of a monkey wrench into what we were doing. But nonetheless, it is what it is, kind of thing.
And then just 2 last questions and I'll cede the microphone over, Mr. Chair. So then with regards to I know we're going to eventually, the plan is to migrate to a managed services within MR 911. I believe that was a statement I heard earlier. Have we identified the funding yet? Have we gotten grants on board yet to pay for that migration? Or is that to be determined when we get a little bit better understanding of that process?
We didn't talk about the results of the ongoing negotiations between MR 911 and the state. That would probably be dependent upon a question about what happens next. In a grant situation, well, a couple things, backing up for a second. If the state is taking the position that they will not tell a PSAP, you have to stay in MR 911, and we will schedule you for changeover to NG 911. They are asserting that they have the funding to do that. So it's way out of scope for me to know what their internal plans are to do if X number were to go and X number were not to go, and how they take that remaining funding. Because implicit in all this if a recommendation from us, for example, that you accept is to agree with the state that we will fully integrate MR 911 into the network and become a third core, if you will, then there's costs to the state for that we can't allocate and know about without knowing exactly how they plan to spend that. Because all of a sudden, right now, they've got a budget, say, for Scottsdale. They know what they have to spend for CHE and what they got to spend for networking to get there. They've already got the core, and they're an AT&T Comtech's required to deliver. But what happens if MR 911 becomes a fully compliant part of the state system is that all of a sudden we lose that connectivity to actually say, oh, it's going to cost X for CHE. There's a whole bunch of different costs that go into providing all of the logical routing function, the the ability to route based upon location, the ability to verify location, the LVF and all that. Those are costs that we don't have yet because we don't know how they plan and implement.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a challenge for all of us on this committee is, I mean, at the end of the day, based on the report here, I don't think it's a big surprise, but our MR 911 system as a whole is very solid and works very well. Then to say, well, we're going to look at what's the ability to go to the state, there doesn't seem to be any super technology advantage or feature set advantage by going to the state. So it will come down perhaps to the funding and the impact on funding and the long range ability to keep the system up. And again, I know that probably wasn't in your scope of work, but I think it's going to be one of the challenges we'll have in terms of forming a recommendation.
You'll read in the report that you get this afternoon about, we talked about why we're at the impasse and what the crux of the matter is. And everything hinges on how that's resolved. Because, I mean, you could, actually, I don't want to pre-speak about options, so it's probably not a good idea. We could talk forever here. And you'll be having the same questions for us next month.
Great. And the last question, I really like the example of both Harris County, King County, because one, as you say, was really managed internally 100% versus external. I didn't see a budget for King County. So if you could get me I saw some numbers there, but I didn't know whether that actually reflected the actual budget.
No, that is the budget, the numbers that
The
are in there.
23 million?
No, King County.
Yeah, 23 million per year, but they're passing through 50% to their ECCs. So it appears that they're operating on this, and we have more detail in the report, but it looks like that if you're looking at this number, that half of 23 is what they're
13,
spending,
so 36
and the
million.
rest is passing through to their.
Yeah, they get to
ECCs.
keep half of that 23. And then they are obligated, their funding formula says they get half of that and pass the rest on to PSAPs.
I guess, to me, I think the two systems are dramatically different. They're functionally the same. I'd like to get maybe really specific numbers on the two budgets, just so I understand that better, because if we're looking at going to an internal model versus an external model, it appears there's a relatively large cost that Harris County has incurred by doing it 100%. Now, I know cost of living is a little bit different, but having come from King County, it's probably equally the same cost of,
There's nothing cheaper about King County, sir.
Exactly. So if you could just maybe drill down a little bit more specifics and you can just pass it on as additional note, that would be fine. Thanks.
Sure.
Thanks. Scott. Any other questions or comments from the committee? I thank you very much for the report. We look forward to more. Audrey, I'm assuming that you talked about sending out the draft to the committee members. I would request we also provide a copy to the state. Because I think this is a conversation that has to end up ultimately in a conversation between us and the state of Arizona. Because there is that dynamic of the fact they're out there offering the AT&T system. And I think what I would offer is, as you're concluding your report, is they've opened up the idea, the thought that says, because I've asked them, I said, if you take the current scheme that you've have a response for AT&T and everybody just showed up at your door tomorrow and said, okay, we're in, are you ready for that? And they, I'll be careful how I say this. I don't think they're enthusiastic about that. I think they recognize there may be an opportunity. I think this is what we look to you all is it says, listen, you have a very dense urban core you have the whole state of Arizona. Is there something that's unique about the kind of level of service, whether it's the security, whether it's redundancy, whatever, that should be looked at, that you take what they've proposed and then what's the added layer of enhancement to provide that level of security that we should get as, compared to other peers as far as level of service and what that looks like. So I'm just showing that, putting that out there because I think they're certainly putting aside costs for right now, right? But I think that's something they were certainly open to that idea, recognize you can't just take the template that AT&T responded to the state currently has on the books and then just, apply that across the entire state. I don't think, at least my impression was when I offered that scenario, they were open to the idea that maybe there's a hub core kind of consideration for, and they're open to having that discussion. So I want to tee this conversation up as we have this dialogue with them throughout this process and as you get your report out. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
And when you
It's actually to Audrey.
was that?
We can certainly share the draft report with them.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. We look forward. So the next drop will be the final draft. What is
It's going to be the draft of the recommendations, final evaluation recommendations,
okay.
and that will come June 9th, which is a Friday. I'll basically have a chance to look it over. They'll give you a presentation again. I believe we have you scheduled for June, the Monday.
Okay.
So they'll give you the presentation. We'll send out the report again, and then obviously take comments and decide how to move forward. And that's kind of a question for this committee.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to get it, but you have to have time to process it.
Well, maybe that's, well, let's talk. And then I think somewhere after everybody's had a time to consume it, I do think it would be helpful if there's an opportunity. And I guess one of the things I want is the state to give comments even on this draft directly back to you all. And then I think we want to make sure the state has an opportunity to comment on the final report and then maybe have an opportunity where they're here, federal's here, and we kind of have this discussion about the recommendations and their viewpoints on that. So, I mean, that's down the road, but just kind of thinking that down the road. Okay. Very good. Okay. Thank you very much. So that was what, item 4. Now we'll proceed to item 5. The next agenda item, Liz Graber with the Maricopa Region 911 Administrator will provide an update on the list of projects submitted for the first grant cycle of the Arizona 911 grant program. Liz.
Thank you, Chairman Brady and committee. Part of our agreement, as you're aware, that we have 2 6-month grant cycles for fiscal year 2024. And as part of our agreement with the state that we would not submit any project-related costs in the first budget cycle. So in fiscal year 2024, we have ASU and Avondale scheduled. We also had Peoria and Wickenburg, but they are moving to the state solution. So we did not factor those into our budget. So there are no specific budget in that first 6 months, waiting what the results and the decision is of this committee on moving forward. The amount our total amount for the first 6 months is covering maintenance, support contracts, and monthly contracts for the network, and comes to a little over $3 million. We do have Peoria, Gilbert, and Paradise Valley as part of, we had a partial included them in. We separated them out as they have also put in for grant money, but we know that we have to carry them for the first 6 months. So we itemized them out with their support contracts and with the networking costs for that first 6 months. And so those were included in there. Scottsdale and Wickenburg had been scheduled to cut prior to the new fiscal year. We had Wickenburg cutting over to the state system on May 24th next week. And we got an email this morning that probably will be mid-July It's having to be delayed because of some issues, and we'll have to reconfigure to make sure that they're covered in costs until they do cut over. Scottsdale is scheduled. We haven't heard of any delays with them on June 20th. So they will be independent as of the new fiscal year. And Scottsdale had upgraded a year ago to Vesta in the amount of, it costs $734,000. With the change to the state system, they are getting all new equipment. So our goal is to take the decommissioned equipment that's still under warranty and use it strategically for our other PSAPs to see how we can use that and not waste that equipment that is only a year old. And that's my report on the projects. I know one more thing, I'm sorry, Phoenix PD, as they work on their new building, that they're going to move into, their timelines continue to get pushed back. So they're looking at perhaps not even going in fiscal year 2024. It might be pushed into 2025. And we're meeting with the state to discuss that. But they were identified in fiscal year 2024. But as I said at the beginning, we have no projects money slated for the first grant cycle. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Yes, Dan.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to clarify, at this point in time, which agencies have indicated that they're leaving the region? I was aware of Wickenburg, Scottsdale, Gilbert, and PV, but I thought I heard you say something about Peoria. So could you just clarify which?
Oh, absolutely. Peoria indicated that they would only want a 6-month grant for, because we sent out a message to all the PSAPs, would we apply for the grant? Peoria indicated they only wanted us to apply for the first grant. And they also gave a letter to MAG, received a letter from the city of Peoria with their intentions of moving over to the state system.
Okay, thank you.
So I'll go back again to my conversation with the state that we've had. I asked the question, hypothetically, what would happen if everybody decided to turn to the state for their contract? How long would that take? The response was less than 2 years, a year and a half. So that sounds pretty, that's pretty impressive. And it would be cheaper than the way the system is today. I guess what I'd ask is we need to circle back around and ask them that question again and say, what if? Because I mean, we need to put our options on the table, right? It says, what if after this review, we all decide, we're all going to join the party. We're all going to do it. When could we expect that we'd all be on parity? Because now we're no longer, what happens then? Are we doing grants or we're just all signed up for the state and they're just, what's the process? What's the decision about how you upgrade equipment? And I think that should be I guess my point is when they're creating federal's creating options, we need to understand what the option, that basic option today, no changes. What would that look like? How soon could they do it? And what does that mean as far as the ongoing grant process? So I think we need to put that on the scenario. The other scenario is, well, it's a hybrid. We come, we're part of the state, but maybe there's this enhanced hub core for the urban, but it's still kind of a flavor of the AT&T system with, more redundancy, more resiliency, data center, whatever that might look like. And then I think we'll hear what federal has to say, what their option is. I think we need to have at least those basic two to know what they look like on paper. Just because if you can't compare, you won't know, at some point this becomes even the challenge, when the state runs the numbers, right? And they brought their finance guy and he runs it out for 5 years, the difference between the cost that they're under their RFP versus the hosted local system with the personnel is significant. It's very significant. And so I think we're always going to have this challenge unless we can demonstrate that the system that we're going to endorse is materially superior and enhanced, that being able to draw that much more resources out of this pot is going to be, it's going to be a challenge, right? To justify, the cost per call or however you, I'm not sure what the denominator is, but whatever it is. So we just have to be kind of work through this to get to our point, because as we want performance, we want public safety, we want all of that high technology, and then somewhere under there, someone says at what cost? We need to understand what that looks like.
If I may,
Sure. go ahead,
Chair
Liz.
Brady, one of the things, and I'm not sure if the consultants covered this, but a question comes to my mind: when the state assigned the contract with Comtech, the EZNet provider, it was based on MR 911 being their own EZNet and working as a partner, getting core services from them. So the one thing that we need the state to help us understand, AT&T, we know the costs behind there, but when, like you said, if everyone turned to it, that changes the workload that Comtech does, because the MR 911 system shuts down at that point, the network, and that is put all on Comtech. And where the costs that were put in the contract currently, will that cover Phoenix and the metro area in doing not 911 processing through the EZNet? That, to me, it's a hard question to ask until we can get that question answered on what is the cost to go to one to the other.
Well, I agree with you. And that's why I've asked that question to the state multiple times. And I don't think they're quite ready to answer the question, but they recognize it has to be a scenario that we have to ask. What would that look like? So, okay. Thank you. So item 6 is what? Update on NG 911? Are we, is there more? Go ahead, Liz.
Thank you, Chairman Brady and committee. So these nice gentlemen gave my presentation, so they could pretty much well covered all of it. There's, we're ready to go. Just to emphasize, we were testing on November 30th with the idea of going over to NG 911, and we have been placed on hold. And
When you
and
say we've been placed on hold, the state placed you on hold? Who's
Yes.
placed you on hold? Okay,
the state placed us on hold.
fair enough. Okay. All right, we'll move to item 7. Are there any requests for future agenda items from the committee? Any other comments or questions? If not, Audrey will let us know when we're meeting in June after the final draft is dropped, right? We'll schedule something after that. Is that fair?
Yes, I believe we're working on scheduling that now.
Okay, perfect. All right, there's no further business. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.